The smoke rising from his forge should have been cold and dead after 3 months away. But Kade Chambers could see the shimmer of heat waves dancing above the stone chimney, even from the forest road that led down into the valley where his smithy stood. His heart, which had been a steady drumbeat of exhaustion and relief at finally reaching home, suddenly kicked into a faster rhythm that had nothing to do with the weight of his travel pack or the sword strapped across his back. Someone had been in his home, and they were still there. He approached cautiously, one hand drifting to the pommel of his blade as he moved through the stand of oak trees that sheltered the northern approach to his property. The war had taught him to be careful, to assume nothing, to treat every shadow as a potential threat until proven otherwise. 3 months of fighting along the border had worn grooves into his soul deeper than any blade could cut into steel, and coming home was supposed to be the end of that vigilance. Yet here he was, muscles tensed and ready, because his forge was burning when it should have been as cold as the graves he had helped dig for fallen comrades. The smithy came into full view as he cleared the tree line, and everything looked exactly as he had left it, except for that impossible glow from within the stone structure. The water trough he had built last spring sat undisturbed. The woodpile he had stacked before marching off to war was diminished, but still present, suggesting someone had been feeding his fire regularly. The garden plot his mother had insisted he maintain showed signs of careful tending, green shoots pushing up through dark soil and neat rows that he certainly had not planted. Kade moved around the side of the building, his boots making soft sounds against the packed earth of the yard. The main door to the forge stood slightly ajar, and through the gap he could see the orange glow of hot coals and the silhouette of someone moving with practiced efficiency near the anvil. The figure was too tall to be a human woman, too broad in the shoulders, and when it turned slightly he caught sight of green skin that gleamed with a sheen of sweat in the firelight, an orc, in his smithy, working his forge. His first instinct was the one the war had drilled into him: reach for his weapon and eliminate the threat. But his hand froze halfway to his sword because the orc was not ransacking his home or destroying his tools. She was working the bellows with a steady rhythm, building up heat in the coals with the careful attention of someone who understood the craft. She wore a leather apron over simple wool clothing, and her dark hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung past her shoulder blades. Kade must have made some sound, perhaps a sharp intake of breath or the scrape of his boot against stone, because her head snapped up and she turned to face him fully. He got his first clear look at her then, at the strong features of her face with its high cheekbones and full lips, at the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw, at the pointed ears that were currently laid back against her skull, in an expression that might have been alarm or defiance or both. Her eyes were the color of amber, bright and intelligent in the firelight, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him forget for a moment that he was supposed to be afraid or angry or whatever a human man was supposed to feel when finding an orc in his home. "You are back." Her voice was deeper than a human woman's would be, with a slight roughness around the edges that suggested she did not speak the common tongue often. She did not move away from the forge, did not reach for a weapon, though he could see a heavy smith's hammer within easy reach of her hand. She simply stood there, watching him with those amber eyes, waiting for his reaction. "This is my forge." The words came out more confused than confrontational. He had been prepared for battle or theft or squatters, not for an orc woman who looked at him like she had been expecting his return. "My home. I know." She gestured at the fire, at the tools arranged neatly along the wall, at the small living space beyond the forge where he caught a glimpse of his table and chairs exactly where he had left them. "I have kept it for you, The fire does not go out. 3 moons and 7 days you have been gone. I counted. Kade let his hand fall away from his sword, though he did not relax his guard entirely. Years of living on the frontier, of hearing stories about orc raids and human settlements burned to ash, had taught him that orcs were enemies. Monsters who killed without mercy and showed no understanding of civilized behavior. Yet this orc woman had apparently spent 3 months keeping his forge lit and his property maintained, and she spoke of counting the days of his absence like it mattered to her. Why? The question was simple, but it contained multitudes. Why had she come here? Why had she stayed? Why had she tended his forge instead of destroying it? Why was she looking at him now with an expression that seemed almost hopeful beneath the wariness? She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the fire between them. The forge crackled and popped, sending up small showers of sparks that died in the air before they could reach the ceiling. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. You left bread, in the forest. Last winter when the snows came early and my clan drove me out. You did not know I watched, but I saw you place food in the hollow tree, wrapped in cloth to keep it dry. You did this many times. The memory surfaced slowly, fighting its way through months of war and death to reach the front of his mind. Last winter had been brutal, the worst in a decade according to the old-timers in the village. He had heard rumors of orc scouting parties in the woods, and one day, while checking his snare lines, he had found tracks that were too large to be human. Instead of organizing a hunting party like most men would have done, he had started leaving small offerings of food in places where the tracks seemed to concentrate. Bread, dried meat, apples from his winter stores. He had told himself it was practical, that a well-fed scout was less likely to raid the village, but truthfully he had done it because he could not shake the image of some creature, enemy or not, starving in the frozen woods. That was you. It was not quite a question. You were the one in the forest. She nodded, her expression guarded but honest. My name is Thura. My clan cast me out because I spoke against raiding human settlements. They said I was weak, that I had forgotten the old ways. I would have died in those snows without your bread. She paused, then added with careful precision, You saved my life, though you did not know it. Kade set his pack down slowly, his mind working through the implications. An orc woman, exiled from her clan for refusing to raid humans, had survived the winter on his charity, and then apparently decided to repay the debt by maintaining his property while he was away at war. It was the kind of story that would get him laughed out of any tavern in the region, or worse, accused of collaboration with the enemy. Yet here she stood, and his forge was burning warm and ready for work, and his garden was growing food he had not planted. You have been here the whole time I was gone. He moved closer to the forge, drawn by habit toward the heat and light. This was his space, his sanctuary, and even with an unexpected occupant it called to him like a compass pointing north. 3 months. Yes. Thura stepped back slightly to give him room, though she did not leave the forge area entirely. At first I came only to repay the kindness. I saw you march away with other men, weapons and armor bright in the sun. I thought perhaps you would not return. Many do not from such marches. So I tended the fire in your memory, as my people do for fallen warriors. The idea of an orc woman keeping vigil for him, a human soldier who might well have been fighting her own people's allies, was so absurd that Kade almost laughed. But there was no humor in Thura's face, only a solemn sincerity that made the laughter die in his throat before it could emerge. She had genuinely thought he might die, and she had honored him in the way of her people. The realization settled over him like a heavy cloak, warm and uncomfortable at the same time. "The war is over," he said, for lack of anything better to say. "The border is secure. For now, anyway. I know. Word travels even to those without clans." She turned back to the forge and began damping down the fire slightly, banking the coals with practiced efficiency. "I saw you on the road from the ridge. I would have left before you arrived, but I wanted to be certain the forge was at the right temperature for your return. A smith should come home to a ready fire." She spoke with the confidence of someone who understood the work, and Kade found himself studying her hands as she worked. They were large and strong, scarred in places from burns and cuts, with the calluses that came from holding hammers and tongs for long hours. These were not the hands of a warrior or a raider, but of a craftswoman. "You know smithing?" It was an observation, not a question, but she answered anyway. "My father was a weapons maker for the clan. He taught me before the fever took him. My mother wanted me to marry a warrior to give the clan strong children, but I wanted to work metal instead." There was old pain in her voice, the kind that came from choices that could not be unmade. "That is part of why they cast me out. I was already strange to them, already wrong. Speaking against the raids was simply the final failure they could not ignore." Kade found himself moving to the other side of the anvil, taking up the position he had occupied for countless hours before the war had called him away. The tools were exactly where he had left them, but cleaner, better maintained than he had managed himself. Someone had oiled the handles and sharpened the edges, had organized the stock metal by type and size, had swept the floor clear of scale and debris. It was the forge of a smith who took pride in the work, not just a temporary shelter. "You have done more than keep the fire burning." He gestured at the organized space, at the subtle improvements he was noticing now that he looked carefully. "This is better than I left it." Thura's expression shifted, something that might have been pleasure or pride flickering across her features before she controlled it back to neutrality. "I had time, and I owed you much more than fire tending. Your bread kept me alive, but your forge gave me purpose when I had none. Working here, keeping this place ready for your return, it was the first time since my exile that I felt useful again." The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest in a way that Kade had not expected from an orc. Everything he had been taught said that orcs were simple creatures, driven by violence and base needs, incapable of the finer emotions that separated humans from beasts. Yet Thura spoke of purpose and gratitude, of honoring the dead and maintaining hope for the living, and he could not reconcile the reality of her with the stories he had grown up believing. "I should thank you," he said slowly, testing the words as he spoke them. "But I do not know what happens now. You cannot stay here. If the village finds out I am harboring an orc, they will burn this place to the ground with both of us inside." Pain flickered across her face, quickly masked but not quickly enough. She had known this moment was coming, had probably prepared for it, but that did not make the words hurt less. Kade felt an unexpected pang of guilt at putting that expression on her features, which was ridiculous because he was being practical, not cruel. She was an orc and he was human, and there were rules about such things, rules written in blood and fear and centuries of conflict. "I know." She began removing the leather apron, her movements careful and controlled. "I will leave tonight. There is a cave system in the northern hills where I sheltered before. I can return there. In winter that place nearly killed you." The objection came out before Kade could stop it, before he could remind himself that her survival was not his responsibility. "And it will be winter again in a few months. You cannot live in a cave indefinitely." Thura's hands stilled on the apron ties. She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he saw confusion there mixed with something that might have been hope. "What would you have me do?" "I cannot stay where I am not wanted. I will not bring danger to you after you showed me such kindness. The sensible thing, the safe thing, would be to let her go. To thank her for her service, perhaps give her some supplies for the road, and send her on her way before anyone discovered she had been here. Kade knew this with the certainty of a man who had grown up on the frontier, who understood the delicate balance of survival in a world where different peoples viewed each other as threats. But he also knew with equal certainty that he could not let her walk away into the wilderness to die slowly of starvation or exposure or simple loneliness. Stay. The word came out rough, surprising him almost as much as it clearly surprised her. Just for tonight. It is late, and I am tired, and we can figure out the rest in the morning when I can think clearly. It was a temporary solution, a postponement of the inevitable, but Thura's expression transformed with such obvious relief that Kade felt his resolve to send her away begin to crumble before it had even fully formed. She nodded once, sharp and grateful, and finished removing the apron to hang it on its proper hook. I will sleep in the forge, she said. You should take your own bed. You have traveled far. Kade wanted to argue, to point out that she had been maintaining his home for months and deserved better than a stone floor. But exhaustion was catching up with him now that the initial shock of finding her here had faded. The last 3 months had been an endless blur of marching and fighting and trying to stay alive, and his body was reminding him forcefully that he had pushed it beyond reasonable limits. He nodded his acceptance and moved toward the small living quarters attached to the smithy, then paused at the threshold. Thura, he waited until she looked at him. Thank you for keeping the fire burning, for all of it. Her smile was small, made crooked by her tusks, but it was genuine. You are welcome, Kade Chambers. Sleep well. He stumbled to his bed and fell into it without bothering to remove more than his boots and sword belt, and he was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. His dreams were confused tangles of fire and green skin and amber eyes that watched him with an expression he could not name. And when he woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through his window, he could smell fresh bread baking and hear the sound of someone moving quietly in the forge. For a moment, he thought he had dreamed the whole thing, that he would find his forge cold and his home empty, that Thura would turn out to be nothing more than a fantasy born of exhaustion and loneliness. But then he rose and walked into the main room, and there she was, pulling a loaf from the small oven he had built into the side of the forge, her movements efficient and practiced. She had clearly been up for hours, had already stoked the fire and set water to boil and made breakfast from his meager stores. I thought you might be hungry, she said when she noticed him watching. The bread is not fancy, but it is fresh. Kade could not remember the last time someone had cooked for him, had cared whether he was hungry or comfortable or well-rested. Army rations and campfire meals shared with exhausted soldiers were the only food he had known for months, and the simple domesticity of fresh bread and hot tea threatened to unmake something in his chest that had been holding firm through the entire war. Thank you. He sat at his own table and accepted the plate she offered, and they ate together in a silence that was not quite comfortable but not hostile either. She had made enough for both of them, he noticed, and she ate with good appetite but careful manners, nothing like the savage beasts the stories described. Just a woman sharing breakfast with a man in the quiet of morning, as ordinary as any scene in any home across the land, except for the green skin and tusks and the fundamental impossibility of it all. When the meal was finished and cleared away, Kade knew he could not postpone the conversation any longer. He had promised himself a night to think, and the night was over, and now he had to decide what to do about the orc woman who had kept his forge burning and who looked at him like he was something more than just another human to be feared or fought. "We need to talk about this," he said, and Thura nodded as if she had been expecting it. "About you and what happens next." "I will leave," she said again, with the same quiet resignation she had shown the night before. "I told you I would not bring you trouble. And I told you that you would die in those caves." Kade leaned back in his chair, studying her across the table. "I do not want that on my conscience. You saved my forge, probably saved my livelihood, since I would have lost weeks getting the fire properly established again and word around for commissions. I owe you for that. You owe me nothing. I was repaying a debt, not creating a new one. Then we are even, and what I do next is not about debt at all." He took a breath, committing to the idea that had been forming in his mind since he woke. "I need help. The war put me behind on commissions, and autumn will bring more work as farmers need tools repaired before winter. If you know smithing like you claim, I could use an assistant, temporarily." Hope and disbelief warred on her face, and disbelief was winning. "You would let me stay, work here. The village will find out. The village does not come up this far very often. I am half a day's walk from the nearest neighbor, and I chose this location specifically because I value privacy. People bring me work and I complete it and they leave. As long as you stay out of sight when customers arrive, there is no reason anyone needs to know. And when winter comes again, when I have been here for months and someone notices the extra smoke, the additional supplies you purchase, the fact that your productivity has increased beyond what one man can achieve." She shook her head, her braids sliding across her shoulder. "I will not let you risk everything for me. Let me worry about my own risks." Kade heard the edge of command in his voice, the tone he had learned leading men in battle, and he softened it consciously. "I am offering you work, Thura. Honest work with shelter and food and a chance to practice your craft. If you want to leave, I will not stop you, but I would rather you stayed." The admission cost him something to make, an acknowledgement of want that went beyond practical considerations of labor and productivity. He did want her to stay, he realized, and not just because she was useful or because he felt obligated to help her. There was something compelling about her presence, about the way she moved through his space with confidence and care, about the intelligence in her eyes and the skill in her hands. She was interesting in a way that most people were not, and he had been alone on this mountain for a long time before the war, and the thought of returning to that solitude felt suddenly unbearable. Thura studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I will stay. For the autumn season, through the winter if you still want me here, but if there is trouble I will leave immediately. I will not let you suffer for showing me kindness." Relief flooded through him, disproportionate to the situation but undeniable. "Agreed. Now, if you are going to be my assistant, I need to know what you can actually do. Talk me through your training." Her face transformed, tension giving way to enthusiasm as she began describing her father's teaching methods, the techniques she had learned for working different metals, the projects she had completed before her exile. Kade listened and asked questions, and within an hour they were at the forge together, Thura demonstrating her hammer technique while he watched and evaluated. She was good, he had to admit, better than good in some areas. Her precision with decorative work exceeded his own, and her understanding of temperature and timing was instinctive rather than learned, the mark of someone who had true talent for the craft. They fell into a working rhythm that felt natural despite its newness. Kade took the lead on a commission for a set of hinges, but he let Thura handle the decorative scrollwork on the ends, and he watched with genuine appreciation as she shaped the hot metal into elegant curves that would make the pieces as beautiful as they were functional. She worked with focused intensity, her whole being concentrated on the task, and when she finally plunged the finished piece into the quenching barrel, she looked up at him with an expression of pure joy that made his heart do something complicated in his chest. "You approve?" she asked, though she clearly knew the answer from his face. "I approve. That is beautiful work, Thura. Your father taught you well." She ducked her head, clearly pleased by the praise, and they moved on to the next piece. The day passed in heat and hammer song, in the comfortable silence of craftspeople engaged in shared labor, and when evening came and they finally banked the fire and cleaned the tools, Kade realized he had not thought once about the war, or the long march home, or any of the darkness that had occupied his mind for months. He had simply worked, and it had been good, and Thura had been a part of that goodness. "Same arrangement tonight?" he asked as they prepared to separate for sleep. "You in the forge, me in the bed." Thura hesitated, then said carefully, "There is a loft above the storage area. I found it when I was organizing your metal stock. It is small, but there is room for a bedroll, and it would be warmer than the forge floor, if you do not mind me using that space." Kade had forgotten about the loft, a narrow space under the eaves that he had used for storage when he first built the smithy. "That is fine. Better than fine. Take whatever blankets you need from the chest." She smiled that crooked smile again, and went to make her preparations, and Kade returned to his own bed with the strange feeling that his home was more complete now than it had been when he lived here alone. It was a dangerous thought, one that suggested attachments that could not end well, but he was too tired to examine it closely. He slept deeply and woke to the smell of breakfast cooking, and so began a pattern that would define the next several weeks. They worked together through the late summer days, completing commissions with an efficiency that surprised Kade. What would have taken him a week alone now took 3 or 4 days with Thura's help, and the quality of the work improved as well. She had an eye for detail that he appreciated, and she was not afraid to point out when she thought he was making a mistake or could improve a technique. They argued occasionally, professional disagreements about methods or approaches, but the arguments never turned hostile. They simply debated until one of them was convinced, or they agreed to compromise, and then they went back to work. The village customers came and went, and Thura made herself scarce during those visits, retreating to the forest or the loft until Kade signaled that it was safe to emerge. He told himself it was a sustainable arrangement, that they could continue like this indefinitely, but he knew he was being foolish. Autumn would bring the harvest festival, which meant more visitors, longer stays, increased chances of discovery. And winter would be even worse, with smoke from 2 people's worth of heating visible for miles, with supply needs that would make the village merchants ask questions. But those problems were for the future, and the present was good enough that Kade allowed himself to ignore the inevitable complications. He taught Thura new techniques, and she taught him in return, sharing methods from her clan's tradition that he had never encountered. They talked while they worked, careful conversations at first that grew more open as the days passed. She told him about her childhood, about growing up different in a culture that valued conformity, about the joy she had found in creation when everything around her seemed focused on destruction. He told her about his own path to smithing, about parents lost to sickness, and a determination to build something lasting in a world that seemed dedicated to tearing things down. There were moments when their hands would brush as they passed tools, when their eyes would meet across the forge and hold for a breath longer than necessary, when the air between them felt charged with something that had nothing to do with the heat of the fire. Kade tried not to think about those moments, tried to focus on the work and the simple companionship, and not on the way his pulse quickened when Thura smiled, or the fact that he had started looking forward to their evenings together more than any other part of his day. 6 weeks after his return, a merchant came up from the village with a rush commission for a set of fancy fire tools to be given as a wedding gift. Kade quoted a high price for the quick turnaround, and the man agreed without haggling, which meant the wedding was important and the gift giver wanted to impress. It was the kind of work that would normally take Kade a week of long days, but with Thura's help, they could complete it in 3 days if they worked hard. The merchant left, and Thura emerged from the forest, having watched from concealment to ensure he was gone. A wedding commission, Kade explained, showing her the specifications. Fireplace poker, shovel, tongs, and a stand. Decorative but functional. They want oak leaf patterns worked into the metal. Thura examined the drawings with interest. Oak for strength and endurance. A good symbol for a marriage. I can do the leaf work if you handle the main forging. They threw themselves into the project with focused energy, working late into the evening and starting again early each morning. It was demanding work, technically challenging and time-sensitive, but they moved together with a coordination that felt almost effortless. Kade would heat a piece and Thura would shape it, or she would hold while he hammered, or they would work opposite ends of a long piece in perfect synchronization. They barely needed to speak, communicating instead through gesture and rhythm, 2 smiths operating as a single unit. On the second night, working by lamplight to finish the stand, Kade made a mistake. He was tired, his concentration slipping, and he brought his hammer down at the wrong angle. The piece slipped in the tongs and his hand came down hard on the edge of the anvil instead of the metal. Pain exploded through his knuckles and he swore, dropping the hammer and cradling his injured hand against his chest. Thura was at his side instantly, her hands gentle as she pried his fingers open to examine the damage. "No break," she said after careful probing that made him wince. "But bad bruising. You need to ice it." She guided him to sit while she fetched cold water from the well, soaking a cloth and wrapping it around his hand with careful efficiency. Her touch was surprisingly tender for someone with such strength, and Kade found himself watching her face as she worked, noticing details he had not let himself see before. The curve of her jaw, the length of her lashes, the small scar above her left eyebrow that suggested an old injury. She was beautiful, he realized with sudden clarity, not in spite of her orcish features but because of them, because of the strength and character they represented. "Thank you," he said when she had finished bandaging his hand. "You are good at this." "My father taught me field medicine as well as smithing. Injured smiths cannot work, so we learn to care for ourselves." She sat back on her heels, studying his face with concern. "You pushed too hard today. We should stop for the night." "We cannot afford to stop. The deadline." "Means nothing if you damage your hand so badly you cannot work at all." Her tone was firm, brooking no argument. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow I will do the hammer work and you can supervise. We will still finish on time." Kade wanted to protest, but the throbbing in his hand was getting worse, and he knew she was right. He nodded his acceptance, and she helped him to his feet, steadying him when he swayed slightly from exhaustion and pain. For a moment they stood very close, her hand on his arm and his good hand braced against her shoulder, and the air between them seemed to thicken with awareness. "Kade." His name was soft in her mouth, almost tentative. "If I overstep, tell me, but I think you feel it too. This thing between us." His heart hammered against his ribs, fear and desire tangled so tightly he could not separate them. "I do not know what you mean, liar." But there was no anger in the word, only a kind of sad understanding. "We do not have to speak of it. I know it is impossible. I know what I am and what you are and all the reasons this cannot be. but I wanted you to know that you are not alone in feeling it." She stepped back before he could respond, putting careful distance between them, and Kade let her go because he did not trust himself to do otherwise. She was right, of course. There was something between them, had been almost from the beginning, a connection that went deeper than shared work or mutual gratitude. He looked forward to seeing her each morning, mourned the moment each night when they separated to their different sleeping spaces, found excuses to stand close to her, or make her laugh, or earn one of those crooked smiles. It was attraction, maybe more than attraction, and it was completely impossible. He was human, and she was orc, and there were 1,000 years of hatred and fear standing between what they were and what they might want to be. If anyone found out, if the village even suspected, they would kill her and probably him too. There could be no future in this, no happy ending, only danger and heartbreak and loss, but knowing that did not make him want her less. "Get some sleep," Thura said, her voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow will be a long day." She disappeared up to her loft before he could formulate a response, and Kade went to his own bed and lay awake for hours, his hand throbbing in time with his pulse, and his mind replaying that moment of closeness, of honesty, of acknowledged desire that could go nowhere. In the morning they did not speak of it. They simply worked, Thura taking over the heavy hammer work while Kade directed and handled the detailed filing and fitting. His hand hurt, but it was manageable, and together they finished the wedding commission by the evening of the third day. The set was beautiful, some of their finest work, and when the merchant came to collect it the next morning, his eyes went wide with appreciation. "This is extraordinary," he said, running his fingers over the oak leaf details. "Far better than I expected. The bride's father will be very pleased." He paid the agreed price plus a generous bonus, and after he left, Kade divided the money into 2 portions and offered half to Thura. She stared at the coins in confusion. "What is this? Your share. You did half the work, you get half the pay." "But this is your forge, your commission, your reputation. I am just—" "My partner," Kade interrupted. "In this work, at least, you have earned this." Thura took the money slowly, like she expected it to vanish or be snatched away. "I have not had my own coin since my exile, thank you." "You earned it," he repeated, and then, because he could not help himself, "What will you do with it?" A smile spread across her face, genuine and delighted. "I do not know. I had not thought. There are things I need, I suppose. A better bedroll. Perhaps a book, if the village has a merchant who sells such things. I have missed reading." The image of Thura curled up in her loft, reading by candlelight, was so appealing that Kade had to look away to hide his expression. "The general store sometimes has books. Old ones usually brought in by travelers. Next time I go to the village I can look. Would you?" The hope in her voice was painful in its intensity. "I would go myself, but you cannot, I know." The reminder was sobering, pulling him back from dangerous thoughts of domesticity and partnership. "I will look for you." 3 days later, he made the trip to the village, ostensibly to deliver a completed order for horseshoes, but really to purchase supplies and see what books might be available. The village was busy with harvest preparations, people moving purposefully through the streets with the focused energy that preceded the season's main work. Kade did his business quickly, avoiding unnecessary conversation, but he could not escape entirely. Kade Chambers, back from the war. Old Marcus, the village headman, hailed him from the steps of the meeting hall. "Heard you were home. Good to see you made it through." "Good to be home," Kade agreed, keeping his tone polite but not encouraging. "You must come to the harvest festival next month. There are several young women who have been asking after you, now that you are a proper war hero." Marcus grinned, clearly thinking he was being helpful. Time to think about settling down, starting a family. That forge of yours would be a fine legacy for sons." Kade made non-committal noises and extracted himself as quickly as politeness allowed, but the conversation left a sour taste in his mouth. The village's expectations were clear. He was supposed to marry a human woman, produce human children, continue the cycle of human life in this human settlement. The fact that he found himself increasingly disinterested in that future, that his thoughts turned instead to amber eyes and green skin, and a smile made crooked by tusks, was a problem that would only grow worse with time. He found 2 books at the general store, both old but in decent condition. One was a collection of folk tales, and the other, a treatise on metallurgy that looked like it might have useful information. He bought them both along with supplies for the forge, and when the merchant commented on his increased purchasing, he explained it away as preparation for a busy autumn. It was not exactly a lie, but it felt like one, and he was glad to leave the village behind and make the long walk back up to his mountain smithy. Thura's face, when he presented her with the books, was worth every coin he had spent and every suspicious look from the villagers. She took them with reverent care, running her fingers over the covers like they were precious artifacts, and that evening after the work was done, she sat by the forge and read aloud to him from the folk tales. Her accent turned the familiar stories into something new and strange, and Kade found himself listening not just to the words but to the sound of her voice, deep and warm and increasingly dear to him. The weeks rolled toward autumn proper, the days growing shorter and the nights cool enough to require fires for warmth as well as work. They fell into easy domesticity, cooking together, working together, spending their evenings in conversation or comfortable silence. Thura slept in her loft and Kade in his bed, and they maintained the careful distance of people who both knew they were standing at the edge of a cliff and trying very hard not to fall. But the distance was eroding, worn away by daily contact and shared laughter and the simple human, or orc, need for connection. Kade caught himself finding excuses to touch her, a hand on her shoulder to get her attention, fingers brushing as they passed tools, standing closer than necessary when reviewing work. And she did the same, he noticed, her touch lingering a moment longer than required, her body angling toward his when they talked, her eyes following him when she thought he was not looking. The tension built like water behind a dam, pressure increasing day by day, and Kade knew something would have to give eventually. He tried to convince himself that they could maintain the status quo indefinitely, that they could be partners in work and friends in life, and nothing more complicated than that. But he was lying to himself and he knew it, and from the looks Thura gave him sometimes, she knew it too. The breaking point came on a cold night 2 months after his return, when the first real frost of autumn painted the world silver and forced them to work late to finish a commission before the metal became too difficult to manage in the dropping temperature. They were both exhausted, muscles aching from hours of hard labor, and when they finally finished and banked the fire, Kade could barely summon the energy to clean his tools. "Go to bed," Thura said, taking the hammer from his hand. "I will finish the cleanup. We should both." "Kade." She turned him by the shoulders and gave him a gentle push toward his quarters. "Sleep. You are dead on your feet." He was too tired to argue. He stumbled to his bed and collapsed onto it, not even bothering to remove his clothes. Sleep claimed him instantly, deep and dreamless, the exhaustion of honest labor pulling him under. He woke in darkness to the sound of crying. For a moment he thought he had dreamed it, but then it came again, a muffled sobbing from somewhere above him. The loft. Thura was crying, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding, and the sound of her distress cut through Kade like a blade between his ribs. He should let her have her privacy, should pretend he had not heard, should respect the boundaries they had established. But his feet were already moving, carrying him out of his room and to the ladder that led up to the loft. He climbed it in darkness, finding his way by feel and familiarity, and emerged into the small space where Thura had made her nest. She was huddled in her bedroll, her back to the ladder, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. In the faint moonlight filtering through the small window, he could see her braid had come partially undone, dark hair falling across her shoulders in waves. Thura. He kept his voice soft, not wanting to startle her. "What is wrong?" She went very still, clearly not having heard him approach, and for a moment he thought she would tell him to leave. But then she turned to face him, and even in the dim light he could see tears tracking down her green cheeks. "I am sorry, I did not mean to wake you. You did not. I woke on my own." He moved closer, settling down beside her bedroll. "Talk to me. What has upset you?" She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Everything. Nothing. I do not know." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "I was reading the folk tales again. The one about the princess who marries the knight and they live in a castle and have children and grow old together, and I felt the weight of everything I can never have. Thura. No, let me say this." Her voice was fierce despite the tears. "I have been so happy here, Kade. Working with you, learning from you, just being near you. These have been the best months of my life since my father died. But tonight I realized that this cannot last, that autumn will end and winter will come and eventually someone will discover me and it will all fall apart. And even if no one ever finds out, even if we manage to keep this secret forever, what kind of life is that? Hiding, always hiding, never able to just be." She was right, and the truth of it settled over Kade like a physical weight. They could not continue like this indefinitely. Discovery was inevitable, and when it came, the consequences would be severe. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to end this now, to send her away before they were found out, before whatever was building between them could grow into something even more impossible to deny. But looking at her tear-stained face, at the pain in her amber eyes, Kade found he could not do the smart or safe thing. He reached out and pulled her into his arms, and she came without resistance, pressing her face against his shoulder and crying in earnest now that she did not have to be quiet. He held her and let her grieve for the future they could not have, and somewhere in the holding, his own tears started to fall. "I do not want you to go," he whispered into her hair. "I know you should, I know it would be safer for both of us, but I do not want you to go. I do not want to leave." Her arms tightened around him. "I want to stay here forever. I want to work beside you and talk with you and wake up knowing I will see you. I want." She pulled back just enough to look at him, and her expression was raw with longing. "I want things I have no right to want. So do I." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but he could not hold it back any longer. "I want you, Thura, not just as a partner in the forge, but as more. Everything. I want everything with you, and I know it is impossible, but I cannot seem to stop wanting it." Her breath caught, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to determine if he meant it. "You want me, truly, even though I am." "You are brave and skilled and kind," he interrupted. "You are funny and clever, and you make me feel less alone than I have felt in years. Yes, you are an orc. And I am human, and the world will hate us for it, but I cannot seem to care about that as much as I should. Kade." His name was a prayer and a question and a plea all at once. "If we do this, if we acknowledge this, there is no going back. We cannot unsay these words. I know." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away fresh tears. "I know all the reasons this is a terrible idea. I know the danger. I know we will probably both regret it. But I am so tired of being careful, Thura. I am tired of pretending I do not feel what I feel. If you want me to stop, tell me now, and I will go back to my bed and we will never speak of this again. But if you want this too, she kissed him. It was not tentative or uncertain but fierce and claiming, her lips crashing against his with all the pent-up desire of 2 months spent dancing around the truth. Kade made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back with equal intensity, his hands tangling in her hair as hers gripped his shoulders hard enough to bruise. She tasted like tears and salt and something uniquely her, and he could not get enough of it, could not pull her close enough or kiss her deeply enough to satisfy the hunger that had been building since the day he came home to find his forge still burning. They broke apart finally, gasping for air, and Thura laughed breathlessly against his mouth. "I think that was my answer." "I think so too." Kade pressed his forehead against hers, his heart racing. "What do we do now?" "Now," she pulled back to look at him, her smile crooked and beautiful. "Now we stop pretending. Now we choose this, choose each other, knowing full well it is foolish and dangerous and probably doomed, and we make the most of whatever time we have." It was not a promise of forever, not a guarantee of a happy ending, but it was honest and it was real and it was enough. Kade nodded his agreement and kissed her again, softer this time, taking the time to explore and discover. She made a pleased sound and opened to him, and they lost themselves in each other for a while, in the simple joy of kissing someone who kissed back with equal desire. Eventually, they separated enough to breathe properly, and Thura tugged him down to lie beside her in the narrow confines of her bedroll. It was a tight fit, but neither of them complained, content to curl together in the warmth they created. Kade ran his fingers through her hair, working loose the remnants of her braid, and she traced patterns on his chest through his shirt. "Stay here tonight," she murmured. "I do not want to be alone." "Neither do I." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Though we should probably get a bigger bedroll if this is going to become a habit." She laughed quietly. "Ever practical. Someone has to be. We are both romantics at heart." They talked in whispers until exhaustion finally dragged them toward sleep, sharing confessions and dreams and fears in the darkness. Thura told him about the loneliness of her exile, about watching from the forest as life continued in the village below, about the desperate hope she had felt when she first approached his forge. Kade told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, about coming home and finding her there like an answer to a question he had not known he was asking. "What will we do?" she asked as sleep began to claim them. "We cannot hide forever." "No," Kade agreed. "But we do not have to figure it all out tonight. Let us just be for now. Let us have this." She made a sound of agreement and burrowed closer, and Kade wrapped his arms around her and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own fears and complications. But for tonight they were together, and that was enough. He woke to dawn light and the feel of Thura already stirring, her body warm against his. She smiled when she saw his eyes open and kissed him good morning with a sweetness that made his heart ache in the best way. "No regrets?" she asked. "None, you not even one." She sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair. "Though we should probably get to work, we have a commission to finish." They climbed down from the loft together, and if their hands lingered when they touched, if they stood closer than necessary while making breakfast, if they stole kisses between tasks, well, there was no one there to see or judge. The work day passed in a haze of contentment, everything made better by the simple fact that they no longer had to pretend or hide what they felt. But reality intruded that afternoon in the form of a customer, a farmer from the village who arrived with a broken plow blade that needed reforging. Thura vanished into the forest at the first sound of approaching footsteps, and Kade tried not to let his resentment show as he took the commission and promised to have it ready within the week. The man lingered, gossiping about village news, and Kade endured it because refusing to talk would seem suspicious. "Big news," the farmer said as he prepared to leave. "The headman's daughter is getting married. Festival is going to be larger than usual, 3 days of celebration. You will come, of course. Whole village is expected to attend." Kade's heart sank. He had known the harvest festival was coming, but 3 days of required attendance meant 3 days away from the forge, 3 days of leaving Thura alone, 3 days of pretending to be interested in human women while his heart belonged to someone the village would murder if they knew she existed. "I will try," he said, which was not a commitment but also not a refusal. The farmer seemed satisfied and departed, and Kade waited until he was well out of sight before calling Thura back. She emerged from the trees, her expression carefully neutral. "I heard. 3 days in the village." "I do not have to go." "Yes, you do." She came to stand in front of him, her hands on his arms. "If you skip the festival entirely, people will ask questions. Better that you attend, play your part, keep suspicion away from this place. I hate leaving you alone. I have been alone before. I can manage 3 days." She tried to smile, but it did not quite reach her eyes. "Besides, it will give me time to catch up on the metallurgy book, and perhaps organize the storage shed. It is a disaster in there." Kade pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I will miss you." "And I you. But we will survive it. We have survived worse." The festival was still 3 weeks away, time enough to finish their current commissions and prepare. They threw themselves into work with renewed focus, driven by the knowledge that their time together was precious and limited. The nights were the best, when they would climb to the loft together and curl up in the larger bedroll Kade had purchased, talking and kissing, and simply being close. They did not take things further than that, both conscious of the weight of what they were already doing, both wanting to savor each stage of discovery rather than rushing ahead. 2 weeks before the festival, a letter arrived from the capital, delivered by a royal messenger who looked distinctly annoyed at having to ride so far into the wilderness. It was a commission request from a noble family, a set of decorative gates for their estate, offering a sum that made Kade's eyes widen. It was the kind of work that could sustain him for months, that could raise his reputation to a new level, but it would require travel to the capital to take exact measurements and consult with the family's architect. "You have to accept," Thura said when he showed her the letter. "This is too good an opportunity to pass up. It would mean leaving you for weeks, maybe longer. The capital is a 10-day journey each way, and who knows how long the consultation would take. I can manage the forge while you are gone, keep the fire burning, work on smaller commissions." Her smile was sad but genuine. "I did it before, remember, I can do it again. That was different, we were not." He gestured helplessly between them, unable to find words for what they now were to each other. "I know." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "But the work matters, Kade. Your craft, your reputation, your future. You cannot turn down opportunities like this because of me. I will not let you." They argued about it gently but persistently until Kade finally agreed to send a reply accepting the commission. But he delayed setting a departure date, telling himself he needed to clear his current work queue first, but really just unwilling to leave her. The festival came first anyway, 3 days of celebration that he could not avoid. He made the walk to the village on the first morning of the festival, leaving Thura with instructions to stay hidden and promises to return as quickly as possible. The village was transformed, decorated with autumn harvest symbols and filled with people in their best clothes. There was music and dancing and more food than any group of people could reasonably eat, and Kade moved through it all feeling like a ghost, present in body but wholly absent in spirit. People tried to engage him in conversation. Young women smiled at him with clear intent, and the headman made a point of introducing him to his new son-in-law as a successful craftsman and war hero. Kade played his part adequately, he hoped, but his mind was on the mountain, in a forge where green-skinned hands would be tending his fire and amber eyes would be watching the road for his return. The second day was worse, an endless parade of social obligations and expectations. Old Marcus cornered him after the noon feast and spent an hour extolling the virtues of various eligible women, making it clear that the village expected Kade to marry soon and provide the next generation of smiths. Each suggestion felt like a betrayal of Thura, and Kade had to work hard to keep his expression neutral and his responses non-committal. On the third day, everything went wrong. Kade had retreated to the edge of the festival grounds, desperate for a moment of quiet away from the crowds, when he overheard a conversation between two hunters he recognized from the village. They were discussing tracks they had found in the hills near his forge, tracks too large to be human, and speculating about orcs in the area. One of them was advocating for a hunting party, the other suggesting they wait until after the festival to organize it. Ice flooded Kade's veins. They were talking about Thura's tracks. He was certain of it. She must have been careless during one of her trips to the forest, or perhaps the hunters were just more observant than he had given them credit for. Either way, if they organized a hunting party and went up to his forge, they would find her. And if they found her, they would kill her. He forced himself to remain calm, to not react in any way that would draw attention. He waited until the hunters moved on, then made his excuses to the headman about needing to return home to tend his forge. Marcus was not happy about him leaving early, but Kade was insistent, and finally, the old man relented with a warning that missing future festivals would be noticed. Kade practically ran the path back up the mountain, his heart pounding with fear and urgency. It was late afternoon by the time he reached the forge, and he burst through the door already calling her name. "Thura, where are you?" She appeared from the storage shed, surprise and concern warring on her face. "Kade, you are not supposed to be back until tomorrow. What is wrong?" He pulled her into his arms, holding tight, relief making him shake. "Hunters. They found tracks near here, your tracks. They are talking about organizing a party to investigate. You are not safe here anymore." He felt her go still against him, felt the moment the words fully registered. When she pulled back, her expression was calm, too calm, the look of someone who had been expecting bad news and was almost relieved to finally have it arrive. "Then I will go," she said simply. "Tonight, before they can come, I will take what I need and disappear." "No." The word came out fierce and absolute. "You are not going alone. We will figure this out together. Kade, if they find me here, they will kill us both. You cannot. I cannot let you go." He cupped her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. "I will not let you go. Not into exile, not into danger, not anywhere without me. We are in this together now." "That is insane. You would throw away everything, your forge, your reputation, your life in this village for me." Yes. He had never been more certain of anything. "I would throw away all of it." "You are more important than any of it." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, that crooked, beautiful smile he loved. "You are the most foolish human I have ever met, probably. But I am your foolish human if you will have me." She kissed him hard and desperate, and he kissed back the same way, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard and clinging to each other. "What do we do?" she asked. "Where can we go?" Kade's mind raced through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. They could not stay here, not with hunters coming. They could not go to another human settlement where Thura would face the same prejudice and danger. They could try to find an orc clan that would accept them, but Thura had been exiled and Kade was human, which made that option nearly as dangerous as staying. "The capital," he said slowly. "The commission I accepted. We go there together and we do not come back. The capital. Kade, there are thousands of people there. How would we hide? We would not hide. Not exactly." An idea was forming, risky but possible. "The capital is a real city, not a frontier village. There are people from all over the kingdom there, all kinds of peoples living together. I have heard stories of orcs who work as guards or laborers, who have found ways to exist in human society. It will not be easy, but it might be possible." Thura looked skeptical but willing to consider it. "And if it does not work, if they drive me out or worse, then we keep moving. We find somewhere else, somewhere more remote. There are places in the far north, settlements near the border where humans and orcs trade peacefully. We could go there if we had to. You would do that, leave everything behind, become wanderers just to stay with me." "I would do anything to stay with you." He meant it absolutely. "This forge, this village, they are just places. You are my home now, Thura. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." She kissed him again, softer this time, and he tasted salt from her tears. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light. We pack tonight, take everything we can carry. I will leave a letter for the merchants explaining that I am pursuing the capital commission and will be gone indefinitely. With luck, they will not realize something is wrong until we are long gone." They worked through the night, packing tools and supplies and clothing, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Kade took his best hammers and tongs, some basic metalworking supplies, enough to set up a small forge wherever they ended up. Thura packed her few possessions, the books he had bought her, some preserved food from their stores. They moved with quiet efficiency, years of working together making the process smooth despite the urgency. As dawn approached, Kade took one last look around the forge that had been his home for 5 years. He had built this place with his own hands, had poured his sweat and dreams into every stone and beam. Leaving it felt like tearing off a piece of his soul, but when he looked at Thura waiting by the door with her pack on her back, he knew he was making the right choice. This building was just a building. She was everything. They left as the sun rose, taking the eastern path that would lead them away from the village and toward the main road to the capital. Kade did not look back. He kept his eyes forward, on the road ahead and the woman walking beside him, and he tried not to think about what they were leaving behind or what uncertainties waited ahead. The journey to the capital took 12 days, not the estimated 10, because they had to avoid the main roads and travel carefully to minimize attention. They camped in the forest, taking turns keeping watch, and Kade taught Thura how to move more stealthily through the wilderness. She learned quickly, her natural strength and coordination serving her well, and he found himself grateful once again for her competence and courage. They talked as they traveled, making plans and contingencies, preparing for what they might find in the capital. Kade would present himself as a master smith responding to a commission, and Thura would be his apprentice. It was not a perfect cover, but it was plausible enough, and apprentices were expected to be quiet and deferential, which would give her a reason to avoid extensive interaction. "What if the noble family recognizes that I am not human?" Thura asked one evening as they sat by their small campfire. "You will stay in the background during meetings, and if anyone asks directly, we tell a version of the truth. That I took you on as an apprentice because of your skill, that your heritage is irrelevant to your ability to work metal. Some people will have a problem with it, but in a city that size, there should be enough work that we can afford to lose the bigoted customers. You make it sound so simple." "It will not be simple. It will probably be hard and frustrating, and we will face prejudice and hatred and a dozen other challenges I cannot predict, but we will face them together." He reached across the fire to take her hand. "I would rather have a hard life with you than an easy one without you." She smiled, squeezing his fingers. "Smooth talker. Only for you." They reached the capital on a gray afternoon, and Kade's first sight of the city walls filled him with a mixture of hope and trepidation. This was it, their chance at a new life, assuming they could make it work. They passed through the gates without incident, the guards barely glancing at Thura beyond a cursory check of their travel papers. Inside, the city was overwhelming after months on the mountain, sounds and smells and people everywhere. A chaos of humanity that made Kade's head spin. They found an inn in the craftsman's quarter, a modest place that catered to traveling workers. The innkeeper looked at Thura with suspicion, but accepted Kade's coin and gave them a room without comment. It was small and spare but clean, with a single bed and a window overlooking the street, and Kade felt some of the tension leave his shoulders once the door was closed behind them. "We made it," he said, setting down his pack. "First step complete." Thura moved to the window, looking out at the city below. "It is so loud here, so many people. Too much. I do not know yet. Ask me again in a few days." She turned to face him, and despite the uncertainty in her eyes there was also excitement. "But we are here, together. That is what matters." Kade went to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that for a while, watching the city go about its business. Two souls far from home trying to build something new from the ruins of what they had left behind. The next morning, Kade presented himself at the noble family's estate to discuss the commission. The meeting went well. The family was impressed by his credentials and pleased that he had come so quickly. They walked him through their vision for the gates, showed him the space where they would be installed, and discussed timeline and budget. Kade took careful notes and measurements, asked intelligent questions, and successfully projected the image of a competent professional, despite the fact that half his mind was on Thura waiting back at the inn. When the subject of his assistant came up, Kade explained that he had brought his apprentice to help with the heavier work. The nobleman's steward raised an eyebrow at the mention of an orc apprentice, but the nobleman himself seemed intrigued rather than offended. "Unusual but not unheard of," the nobleman said. "I have an orc in my household guard. Good workers, orcs, strong and loyal if you treat them fairly. Your apprentice is welcome to use the estate's forge for the duration of the project." Relief flooded through Kade. He had been prepared for rejection, for having to find another forge to work from, but this was far better than he had hoped. "Thank you, my lord. We will begin work as soon as the materials are prepared." They settled the final details, and Kade returned to the inn with a contract in hand and hope in his heart. Thura was waiting anxiously, and her face transformed with relief when he told her the news. "They accepted you. Just like that. The nobleman has orc guards. He sees them as people, not monsters. It is not perfect acceptance, but it is better than outright hostility." Kade pulled her into a celebratory embrace. "We can do this, Thura. We can actually make this work." They moved into a small house near the craftsman's quarter, a simple two-room structure with space enough for living and working. Kade set up a modest forge in the attached shed, and they began work on the noble family's gates. It was demanding work, technically challenging and highly visible, but they threw themselves into it with the dedication of people who knew their future depended on success. The city was not always kind. They faced stares and whispers, occasional slurs shouted from passing crowds, shopkeepers who refused to serve Thura and craftsmen who would not speak to Kade. once they learned of his association with an orc. But there were also unexpected kindnesses. Neighbors who nodded greeting without judgment. Other craftspeople who appreciated good work regardless of who produced it. And slowly, gradually, they began to build a life. 3 months into the project, working late one evening to meet a deadline, Thura set down her hammer and turned to Kade with unusual solemnity. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness of her tone made his heart skip. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Or maybe everything is, depending on how you see it." She took a deep breath. "I am with child, Kade, our child." The world seemed to stop, time suspending itself around that single impossible fact. A child, their child. Human and orc, the living embodiment of everything they had risked and sacrificed for, proof that what they had together was real and lasting and capable of creating new life. "Are you certain?" His voice came out rough with emotion. "I have been certain for a few weeks, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." Her hand moved to her stomach in an unconscious protective gesture. "I know this complicates everything. I know a child will make it harder to hide, harder to move if we need to, harder to." He kissed her, cutting off the litany of concerns with the simple expedient of pressing his mouth to hers. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling so wide his face hurt. "A child," he said, wonder coloring every syllable. "We are going to have a child. You are happy." Thura looked uncertain, like she had expected a different reaction. "Happy? Thura, I am terrified and thrilled and so in love with you I can barely think straight. Of course I am happy." He placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "This child is a gift. Proof that what we have is stronger than hate or fear or prejudice. How could I be anything but happy?" She laughed, the sound somewhere between tears and joy. "We are going to be parents. We have no idea what we are doing. Nobody does the first time. We will figure it out together, like everything else." They held each other in the forge, surrounded by half-finished metalwork and the smell of coal smoke, and Kade felt something settle in his chest that he had not known was unsettled. This was right. All of it, the fleeing, the fear, the uncertainty, it had all been leading to this moment, to the knowledge that they were building something that would outlast them both. The gates were completed 4 months later, installed in a ceremony attended by half the noble families in the capital. They were beautiful. Kade's structural work combined with Thura's decorative genius to create something that was both functional and art. The nobleman was delighted, paid them handsomely, and spread word of their skill to his peers. Commissions began arriving, more than they could easily handle, and Kade had to turn down work for the first time in his career. Thura's pregnancy progressed, her body changing in ways that made hiding her condition increasingly difficult. But the craftsman's quarter proved surprisingly accepting. Neighbors offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Other women chatting with Thura about the challenges of new motherhood without seeming to care about the green of her skin or the curve of her tusks. It was not universal acceptance. There were still those who muttered about half-breeds and unnatural unions, but it was enough. They were carving out a place for themselves, slowly but surely. The baby came on a spring morning, arriving with the efficiency that characterized everything about Thura. The midwife they had hired, a practical woman who had delivered hundreds of babies and did not care about the color of their skin, guided them through the process with calm competence. And then there was crying, the unmistakable sound of new life, and the midwife was placing a squirming bundle in Thura's arms. "A son," she announced, "healthy and strong." Kade looked down at his child, at the tiny face that was neither fully human nor fully orc, but some beautiful combination of both, and felt his heart expand to accommodate a love he had not known was possible. The baby had Thura's green-tinged skin but Kade's nose, tiny tusks barely visible in his gums but fully human ears, a perfect impossible blend of both parents. "He is beautiful," Kade whispered, touching one small hand with a gentle finger. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" Thura looked exhausted but radiant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat but her smile brilliant. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but none of them had felt right until this moment. Kade looked at his son, at the proof of everything he and Thura had overcome, and the name came to him with sudden certainty. "Forge," he said. "We name him Forge because that is where we found each other, where your kindness and my need became something neither of us expected, where we built a future from fire and metal and hope." Thura's eyes filled with tears. "Forge. Yes, it is perfect." The midwife made a notation in her records and left them alone with their son, and Kade climbed carefully into bed beside Thura, wrapping his arm around both of them. They sat like that for a long time, 3 hearts beating in synchronization, a family born from impossible circumstances and sustained by stubborn love. News of the half-orc baby spread quickly through the quarter, as such news always did. Some of their neighbors stopped speaking to them. A few customers canceled commissions, and there were anonymous threats left on their doorstep. But there were also gifts, blankets and toys and food brought by people who believed that a child was a child regardless of heritage. And the support outweighed the hatred just enough to let them breathe. Forge grew quickly, strong like his mother but with his father's curiosity and attention to detail. By his first birthday he was toddling around the forge, watching with fascinated eyes as his parents worked metal, and Kade knew with certainty that this child would carry on their craft. There would be challenges ahead, prejudice and difficulty and struggles they could not yet predict, but looking at Thura working beside him while Forge played at their feet, Kade could not bring himself to regret a single choice that had led them here. One evening, after Forge had been put to bed and the forge was banked for the night, Kade and Thura sat together in the small garden they had planted behind their house. The city was quiet around them, as quiet as a city ever got, and the stars were visible between the buildings above. "Do you ever regret it?" Thura asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Leaving your forge, your home, everything you built. Do you wish you had sent me away that first night?" Kade thought about it, really considered the question rather than answering with automatic reassurance. He thought about his forge on the mountain, about the life he could have had if he had made different choices, about the ease and safety of conforming to expectations. And then he thought about the woman beside him, about the child sleeping inside, about the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. "No," he said with absolute certainty. "Not for a single moment. You kept my forge burning when I was gone, Thura, but you did more than that. You kept my heart burning too, gave me a reason to come home that was about more than just walls and tools. Everything I lost, I have gained back 10 times over in you and Forge. I would make the same choice again without hesitation." She turned to kiss him, slow and sweet, and he kissed her back with all the love he had spent the last 2 years learning to express. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling that crooked smile he had fallen in love with, the one that still made his heart race no matter how many times he saw it. "I love you," she said simply. "I do not say it enough, but I love you with everything I am. I love you too." He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, metal and smoke and something uniquely Thura. Always have, always will. They sat together under the stars, 2 people who had risked everything for love and found it was worth every sacrifice. The road ahead would have its challenges, its difficulties and dangers, but they would face them together as they had faced everything else. And somewhere in the house behind them, their son slept peacefully, the living proof that love could transcend boundaries. That family was what you built rather than what you were born into, and that sometimes the greatest forge was not the one that shaped metal, but the one that shaped hearts. Kade thought back to that day he had returned from war, exhausted and alone, expecting to find his forge cold and his home empty. He thought about seeing smoke rising from the chimney, about finding Thura there keeping his fire alive, and he marveled at how one small act of kindness, bread left in a hollow tree during a brutal winter, had cascaded into this impossible, beautiful life. He had returned to find his forge still lit, and in keeping it burning, the orc woman had given him everything he never knew he needed. She had given him love, partnership, purpose, and a future that was richer and fuller than anything he could have imagined. And he would spend the rest of his life grateful that she had been stubborn enough to stay, brave enough to care, and foolish enough to love him back. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small dramas of mortals below, but in that garden in the craftsman's quarter of the capital, two hearts beat as one, and a child dreamed of fires and metal and the loving hands that would one day teach him to shape both. It was not the life Kade had planned, not the future anyone would have predicted, but it was theirs, built from ashes and determination, and a love strong enough to forge new worlds. And it was more than enough. It was everything.